Well, welcome everybody to the Menlo Midweek podcast. My name is Mark. We have a really fun episode today where we're jumping into week 2 of Hope for Everyone with EuBank, our lead pastor, and Rachelle Summers is back with us as well. So we hope that you enjoy today's podcast. Thank you so much to those that have said yes to committing to being with us in person or online for the next 2 weeks after this for our Hope for Everyone series, as well as praying about what commitment looks like for you. Whether that is giving financially or giving with your time. We're so grateful for those that have said yes to helping us do what we do, whether that is online or in person through volunteering with us. We honestly cannot do the things that we do here at Menlo Church without some awesome volunteers like Rob, who helped record this podcast today. So if you are interested in that or have any questions that you'd like us to cover on the podcast, send it to us at 650-600-0402. We'd love to pass those on for you. And now let's go ahead and jump into today's podcast. Well, welcome everybody to the Menlo Midweek podcast. My name is Mark. Rachelle's with us today.
Hey.
And Phil's here as usual.
Yay. No, it's good to see everybody.
Good to have you here.
Rachelle,
Yes.
it's so good to have you back on.
Thank you.
Give us an update. How's life been since you were last with us? And give us the news about what you're doing now.
When was the last time I was here?
It was a good 6 or 7 episodes ago.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. So things are good. Life is fine. I'm pulling fall in, or I'm like imagining that it would happen quicker, even though it's still hot.
Yeah.
Because I love the fall. And I started an interim position with Menlo Church. So I'm like full-time staff.
Yay!
Yeah.
What a blessing you have been already. I mean, I'll give you a shout out because Rachelle, in her cohort of seminary, which she graduated and did great in.
Thank you.
She had the nickname of Mom.
I did.
And it already feels like I have another staff mom.
Fantastic.
And it just feels so great seeing you around the office, and
Thank you.
your warmth and your care for everyone is already making an impact. So thank you, and we're so excited for you to be with us.
Thank you. I tried to make my title interim mom, Menlo staff mom, but
Phil didn't go for that?
No. It is officially interim spiritual formation associate.
Okay.
So, but I'm happy to also be a mom presence as well.
Great.
Yeah.
Phil, how are you doing today?
Doing well.
Yeah?
Glad to be here. It's it's been a good week, and my life has felt more normal. Like,
Okay.
this tells you that I was probably a little overbooked, that it was like a pretty normal week where I was able to do normal work, and at times I felt guilty that I was not busier, and I was like, that is probably a red flag. So feeling good, feeling thankful.
Yeah.
Yes.
So
Yep. And you're just coming off of a lot of things, man. I could see the pace of the last couple of weeks you've been running at, and I'm glad for your sake that you kind of feel like you could peel back a little bit, but I could totally understand as to how that would feel rough compared to the last couple of weeks.
for sure. Yeah. Well, and really, when you do these series, I've talked about this, like you, like there's been so much work beforehand. That's actually kind of your most busy time.
Yeah.
And then when it becomes public, a lot of those conversations are already finished. And so then your schedule goes back to normal. So
Yep.
I am very thankful for that.
Yes.
Yep.
And let's dive into your message a little bit. Let's get a little bit of a recap for those that missed it, and then maybe how you've approached this message and how that's unique as opposed to other messages that you've prepped for.
Yeah. So, the series is trying to help people think and pray through the Hope for Everyone initiative over the next 3 years within the framework of this kind of bigger call we feel like God's given us as a church to reach 3% of the Bay Area in the next 10 years. And it's been like pretty amazing. I mean, I think this is what typically, like, God works in unity. He works, I think, with vision. And I mean, I've had pastors and like nonprofit leaders and people at significant big tech environments that I've had conversations with, even just since the series went public, of people that are like, we're in, what do we do? Let's go.
That's good.
Which is really fun. And I think this idea, this dream to say, what if one of the last places that doesn't have a documented revival did? And what if the hope of heaven invading the hearts of people in Silicon Valley and the Bay Area didn't just sit here and rippled out from here around the world? So trying to help people think about that and understand what does engagement look like. In week 1, we tried a lot to focus on what does it look like to think about prayer and service, and we sort of alluded to committing financially around this big vision. And then this week really was about how we think about money and generosity. And I kind of apologized because I apologize because I think this is an area that pastors, myself included, tend to shy away from. That if things are okay, you just kind of do that. And honestly, I felt like there was a sense in which at Menlo, if you go into an organization and there's like money challenges, I always feel like the budget and spend side is like the first thing you do to earn trust to be able to have the conversation on the other side. So I felt like there were things we needed to do to tighten our belt financially to make sure that every dollar had a name and every name had a mission before we went to Menlo and said, hey, would you help resource the vision? So we're at that place, but then just trying to help people understand that when we don't talk to you about money, we're actually robbing a blessing that God wants to bring in your life. And I hope that people heard it from within that context, and that, Jesus talks about money more than anything else. And it's not because money itself holds some sort of unique power. It's because money reveals our heart. And if we want to move our heart, we move our resources. And so this initiative, I think, represents an opportunity for us all, myself included, to do that. So.
Yeah. I think the nice way that you put it was God doesn't want your money. He wants your heart, and giving is how we show he has it. Yes?
That's right.
My version would be check your receipts. That's where your heart is.
It's good. It's good.
Yours was much nicer, though.
No, it's nice.
You want to preach next weekend?
Week 3.
Week 3, featuring Rachelle. And if you're tuning in, you're like, what the heck what did I just walk into? I'd really encourage you to go to menlo.church/hope, or if you're listening or watching this, just press back two episodes. You'll hear Phil's message. You'll hear the midweek where we go into that a little bit more in depth.
Yeah.
And this is a 4-week series that we're in where we're talking about bringing hope to everyone. That's partnering with a campaign that we've launched as well to help raise $80 million. Phil?
Yep. And 45 of that is dollars that we would, Lord willing, anticipate to come in through the normal course of the next 3 years. And 35 million of it represents new investments through resourcing partners in the Bay Area and beyond at more than 10%, as well as making capital improvements to key parts of our campuses around the Bay Area, and then 2 of our campuses, San Mateo and Mountain View, that we currently rent, finding permanent homes for both of those campuses, not only so that we don't have a risk that we would lose those, but also that we can reinvigorate those spaces to make sure that they're really built, not for us, like, we don't like things to be nicer, that's fine, but we're sort of used to church being church. We actually want to invest in those campuses so that the buildings don't become barriers to relationship. That when people come on, every space makes a statement, and we want the spaces at Menlo to make the statement that God loves you, that he sees you, and that we do too, and that you're worthy of an investment. And so we believe that this initiative will help us do that.
Yep.
Before we jump more into your message, I want to kind of pick apart some of this idea of revival, as you mentioned. When I hear revival, I think of Ashbury Revival that kind of just happened back east, where you had a bunch of guys playing music in a church for a week or so.
Yeah.
I think of Tent Revival. I think of Billy Graham. What is revival, Phil? What does that look like?
Good question.
What does that mean? What could that look like for the Bay Area?
Yeah, dude, that's a great question. I think, typically revival is defined as a move of God that has a regional or national impact. I think, some of it becomes a vocab lesson, right? Like, so I grew up in a Baptist context, and every year we had what we called a week-long revival, which was really just like, we're going to do church meetings for a week, which is like, we shouldn't call it a revival, but some places call that like a tent meeting, just is different based on your tradition. And then I've heard the Asbury Revival actually called the Asbury like outpouring, because it was kind of this just like unique thing that God did in that space. And I don't want to minimize any of that stuff. Like, that's amazing. But when we look historically, week 1 of the series, I talked about kind of the first, second, and third Great Awakening in the United States, as well as the Jesus movement in the 60s and 70s of these like, really unique moments that created a ripple that made a difference all around the country. And I think the Bay Area represents something that if God were to do something like that, you see people that are, in mass deciding to follow Jesus, in mass deciding to get baptized, in mass deciding to change their life, to redirect it to the will of God for their life, I don't think that we would just be talking about a regional or national impact because of what the Bay Area represents. I think we're talking about global impact. And so I think the opportunity to say, the Bay Area represents one of the very last places where we don't have a documented revival like that taking place. And I think that, actually my first two messages that I preached at Menlo when I arrived a couple years ago were about this idea that there is never revival without renewal, and that renewal or revival is really is basically what it is it's renewal gone viral, right? That's what revival really is. What God is doing in me, what God is doing in us, that God he radiates that. And so, sometimes I think as Christians, we're like, those non-Christians, they better figure this out. And we have these blind spots in our own life that we kind of are like, we're cool with these being blind spots. And we're like, God, but would you do a bunch of work out here? And I would say prayer, repentance, renewal, like personal introspection. Every time you see a move of God, it comes with that first. And so for us, when we think about how do we focus on doing ministry well, on seeking the heart of God, on praying together, on praying that God would activate in us a passion for the 3%, I think all those are precursors to say, God, we're really serious about this. Would you use us in this season, in this moment? But I think that idea that God would choose to use us in this season for a significant outpouring of people turning to Him, I think that's what we're praying and believing for.
Yeah.
So
that's great. And I feel like that gives a little bit more context to the person that was in the room that came in for the first time and was like, see, they just want my money. So how can we approach this idea of giving, seeing it as generosity, or even seeing it as obedience to God? What does that look like, Phil?
Yeah.
Well, I talked a little bit about how, Jesus talks more about money than anything else. And he doesn't talk about money that way, to Rachelle's point earlier, because he needs our money. Scriptures tell us he's got a cattle on 1,000 hills. He made it all. Like, it's all his. Sometimes we think, like, how much of my money does God want? And I always have to remind myself, I don't have any money. God has money, and He's trusted me with it. And so, what am I doing with God's resources? Every decision that I make, Jesus is standing next to me. He's looking at my bank account. He's looking at my spending patterns. He wants all of them to glorify Him.
Right.
And then there are these like patterns of generosity that we see that followers of Jesus have had really throughout church history. And so trying to help people understand, when we think about giving, I talked about the spectrum of abuse, that on one end, there's like the prosperity gospel of I put God in my debt, that if I give a certain amount or if I give a certain way, then God will, and so you think about like sort of the jokes of TV evangelists and like, we'll send you a blessed towel, and all the things. And I think we want to be very clear that that's not us, that's not what we believe is true. But I think a lot of us, myself included, in order to avoid that one, we jump into scarcity. That's how I grew up. And so God doesn't do anything. He doesn't ever show up. He doesn't really care. He doesn't want your money. He doesn't need your money. He doesn't even want to talk to you about your money. That's not true either. And so if we want favor in our life, what we saw over and over again in the scriptures is that actually wherever we put our money, our heart follows. That it's a rudder. It's an invisible rudder in our life of how we spend. And I think that God's favor, which is how all of us are fueled in our life, is the favor of God. God's favor follows generosity. And so it doesn't mean that we're going to like be the most, financially rich ever. It just means when we trust God with our finances, there is favor that gets poured out into our life. That when we sow little, when we plant very few seeds with generosity, we reap little. And for a lot of us, we're living out of a place of scarcity, and we're going, why isn't God showing up? And He's like, I told you how I would show up. Like, please, please, please. Actually, it's the only place in all the scriptures that we're told to test God is with generosity. It's the only place. Actually, everywhere else we're told not to, except for this one. And so, if you're not a follower of Jesus, this isn't for you. But if you're a follower of Jesus and you go, what does it mean for God to have my heart? Well, Jesus would say, wherever your treasure is, that's where your heart really actually is. And so we talked about some of the cultural challenges around like the consumption assumption and some of the statistics about where we spend money. And some of them are really staggering, right? And I talked about that passage, from everyone who has been given much, much will be demanded. And from the one who has been entrusted with much, much will be asked. And I think it's easy to look at the people that are to our right and to our left. In our moment, in our neighborhood, we have a unique dynamic here at Menlo. Sometimes we'll joke around like if you're on staff at Menlo, it's like we cosplay being rich. Like we're not like, when I look at my neighbors, I'm like, this is crazy that we live next to you.
Yeah, for sure.
And so if I qualify them as rich and me as not rich, well, then it's pretty easy for me to justify, this passage doesn't apply to me.
Right.
But I bet if I asked my neighbors, do you think you're rich? They would talk about people next to them or a few streets over that to them, rich is a moving target.
Yep.
Right.
And when we think about what rich means globally, and especially when we think about it globally and historically, if you are listening to this podcast right now, you are among the most rich people that have ever existed in the history of the world, right?
Yeah.
And so we'll talk a little bit about that more next week, but I think it creates a really dangerous spiritual blind spot of greed and gluttony and materialism and consumerism that generosity is the antidote to. And so it's not loving people and it's not shepherding God's church at Menlo well for us to not talk about it.
Yeah, that makes my mind wonder, what if I made generosity the moving target?
Yeah.
What would that look like in my life, and how would that change the perspective in which I see everything? Yeah, interesting.
I mean, just ask Scrooge, right? Too bad this isn't a Christmas podcast, but
That's right.
Yeah, just ask Scrooge. Eventually, he changed his mind and became very generous.
Well, the line, like, you can't take it with you, is such an important line.
Yeah.
Because it's really true. The joke of, like, you've never seen a U-Haul traveling behind a hearse. Or we hear about how,
Never heard that line.
Oh, really? Yeah. Or, like, you've heard about the, pharaohs that would be put inside of a tomb with all their stuff and all their servants, actually, too, so they could take them with them to the afterlife.
Right.
And we read Jesus' text in Matthew 6, don't lay up for yourselves treasures on earth where moth and rust destroy and where thieves break in and steal. Jesus isn't even saying you can't take it with you. He's saying, like, the very nature of the thing you want is temporary.
Yes.
Not only can you not take it with you, it will deteriorate. And then he offers this contrast in verse 20, but lay up for yourselves treasures in heaven where neither the moth nor rust destroy and where thieves do not break in and steal. For where your treasure is, there your heart will be also. That's the continuation of it.
Right.
And so this idea of, like, do you want to give it? And the, like, crazy part of, if you give, it'll be waiting for you. That's like, if you give it, you'll get it. But if you get it now, you'll leave it behind. That's like a crazy countercultural true statement. And we all know it in a little bit, right? Like, it's why fads and trends and, like, it's why the new iPhone is a thing. And we can go look in drawers in our house right now, all of us probably can, and see stuff that when we bought it, we were like, this thing is going to make me happy.
Yeah.
And now we're like, should I throw it away, or should I give it away, or do I just keep it in here in case
Even
I need it?
the iPhone box.
Right,
iPhone box.
yeah, for sure,
gosh.
right? For sure.
Yeah.
And I think they're just these reminders, these artifacts of the insufficiency of the kingdoms of this world. They are all depreciating assets.
Wow. Yeah. Last week, Phil and I chatted about kind of our history with growing up in church and tithing and campaigns either gone wrong or gone right.
Yeah.
Rachelle, I'm curious, for your experience growing up, what was tithing like? Was it a thing for you growing up? Yeah.
Yes, for sure. All of the above. I mean, even revivals. We did tent revivals as well, and it always was in August, like the worst time of the year in August when it's hot in New York and you're like standing outside all hours of the day under a tent.
Because the revivalists can be like, you think it's hot here. That was the setup, right? That's
yeah.
I mean, that's the kind of the stuff that happened. I'm not even joking.
For sure.
I see you sweating out there. Like, okay.
Yeah. Right. Yeah. But tithing, I mean, my parents were very generous. And I think there's a way to understand generosity and stewardship as well. I think you should be generous as you are a good steward of your finances as well. And I think that's like an important conversation. And this message was good to hear. But as far as like, yeah, I've been through quite a few capital campaigns in my life with different churches. You know, they had like the giant thermometer on the stage and they would paint it as, you know, the money came in. But like, there were some not so great experiences as well that I'm sure turned a lot of people away from the church or from God. Like, there were times where it was like, keep those doors closed until we raise the amount of money that we need. And that is not what God
Pass
is
the
calling
baskets
us to.
again. Yeah.
Yeah, keep passing the baskets. People would put jewelry in the baskets. Like, that is not what God calls us to at all, you know, and that is not good stewardship. That is not being wise. And so I actually, like, when I first heard the words capital campaign as like a staff spouse, as a congregant, for a minute, I like was like, are we sure this is what we're going to do? And just going to like one of the events, one of the nights that we had, and going through the series so far, I actually feel incredibly hopeful and do see this as an opportunity for us to grow as a congregation, a community, and reach beyond. Because we want to have revival, right? We want to reach the last, the least, and lonely, or as Phil sometimes says, is like the skeptics, right, and the seekers. And we want to bring the love of Jesus to the people around us. But like, I want to bring people to church on Sunday, but you know, if we keep doing that and the building's not big enough, what's going to happen, right? Or we want to serve in missions and outreach. We want to continue to make those things happen. All of those things are going to grow as we move forward in this campaign. And I think also the idea of this campaign is a great way to kick off new habits in our life. For people to reevaluate their finances and say, like I said before, like, check your receipts. That's where your giving is. That's where your heart is. Like on social media, like how it pays attention to your algorithm. You can pull up anyone's For You page and see what they're thinking about all the time. If you go to your finances, go to your receipts, you're going to see what you're buying all the time and how are you giving. And so I think this is a really great opportunity for us as a church and community and individuals to like reevaluate our lives and are we doing the things that God asks us to because he loves us and because he wants to see our hearts?
Yes,
So, yeah.
I love that. And I love that piece of if we're approaching this me first, it loses the depth that it can have when we approach it as, but what about my friend that wants to come with me?
Right.
And if we see it through there, the lens gets peeled back a bit as to, wow, this really isn't for me. And it probably shouldn't be for me.
Yeah.
And that's something that I've loved that you've said, probably will continue to say, Phil.
Yeah.
About how really it's not for us.
Yeah.
It is for the people that we're trying to bring.
Right.
And that kind of ties into the piece of why now, Phil? Why do we have to start this right now?
Yeah, man.
Yeah.
I think, you know, the question of why do we need this? Like, I'll just go back to what we talked about last week. We don't. It's not for us. If this was just like creature comforts of improved church, God help us. And I think the question of why do we need to do this now? We don't. We don't. Like, we're going to heaven. Pumped about it. It's going to be amazing. But I think I used to think about this all the time with students. I used to do student ministry for a long time, and I would think about the clock that I had with students. I used to have it, actually. For every grade level, I had how many weeks I had left with them. And I would think, like, okay, this is how many weeks I have before they graduate. And I knew the statistics. I knew the statistics, not just nationally, but for our students, historically, of when they graduated, how many of them were still connected to a faith community 12 months later. And that was actually our kind of key measuring stick, was that percentage. But I knew tick-tock, 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 tick-tock. And the idea of like, hey, can we wait a year to do this? And I would just go like, there's a bunch of students that we're not going to reach, so we're just gonna pour that out. Like, we're good. We're just burning off that chaff. Like,
Right.
Sorry.
Yeah.
And I think from my perspective, this goal of 10%, to a certain extent, this 3% or this 3 years to hit that 3% is really about us establishing a bunch of foundational things that help create the flywheel over the subsequent 7 years that help us get there.
Right.
And I think, you know, we live in a transient place. And so the neighbors that you're thinking of right now that you're like, man, I would love to be able to invite them And if there was an amazing event, or that campus was set up to be able to care for their neurodivergent kids, or there was an amazing park in that church campus that even if they didn't come to church, that park was available, or that group of students whose school is right across from our Saratoga campus, we offered them like a meal once a week that was like a really fun, cool thing that was really built for them as an outreach all the time. We go like, well, why do we need to do that now? Because those students are going to hell. Because like the time, Paul says the days are evil. And so, now part of this is who I am as a person and who I am as a leader. But for me, when somebody says like, why is this so urgent? I go, everything's this urgent. Like what we're doing matters way too much. And I think at Menlo Park, we're acutely aware that life is temporary. We do more memorials and funerals at Menlo Park than any other campus. And I just think, man, God bless those people. I'm so glad that we get to do those memorials and funerals, and so many of them we get to talk about a legacy of faith. But how many percent of people in our communities, they're having funerals done for them, and there's no legacy of faith to talk about. And I want us to understand the days are evil. We want to make the most of the time. We're not working primarily for God. We're working with God because He's got a mission that He doesn't want anyone to perish, but that all would come to know Him. And so I would just say, man, let's roll up our sleeves together. Let's lean in together. The plan is aggressive, but I don't think it's reckless. I think it is in line with the heart of God for our church, and to be able to leverage the last 150 years to begin writing the next.
I was going to say, it's just speaking to like the urgency. Why is this important? Why now? And we want to spread the gospel, right? And I was just thinking about like last week, I went to Trader Joe's at 8 a.m. thinking like, oh, I'm going to get in and get out, no problem. When I pulled in the parking lot,
they're doing the bag thing.
Oh
right?
my gosh, there was this giant line around the building. And I was like, this reminds me of the pandemic. Are we waiting to get in the store? Like, what is happening? And it turns out
Thanks, TikTok.
They were waiting to buy some bags, like these little mini bags. But like there was urgency behind that because of social media. There was urgency to get the latest thing. It's a tote bag. It's like, and a few months ago, it was a different bag, also from Trader Joe's. Like there was this pink insulated lunch bag, and now it's a tote bag. But there was urgency behind that, and people were like, I got to get this. If you are a believer, if you believe in Jesus Christ, if you want to share the gospel, why wouldn't you want to have the same urgency? Why wouldn't you want to do everything you could to reach as many people as possible?
Yep. And I think like the thing that I love about Menlo is that there are groups of people that just like generation after generation after generation have done that, right? Like they've given their time, they've given their talent, and they've given their treasure. And we wouldn't be here if it weren't for them. And so it's our turn. It's our turn to be that for the next generation. And I hope that people hear that. I hope they get a chance to respond. And I think anytime you do this, there's multiple groups of people, right? Some people, they don't even have the details, but they just see a number and they're mad and they'll email me and I try to be gracious back, right? I think about that text in Proverbs that a soft response turns away anger. Like I never want to, like I'm going to be kind. I'm going to be kind. But like the stuff that I just man, it breaks my heart and it's so encouraging. I talked about that quote from that grandmother who emailed me and said, I would give everything to see my grandchildren walking with God. And I just think like how that grandmother feels about her grandkids is how God feels about that coworker you have right now, about that classmate, about that teammate, about that spouse, about that neighbor, that level of like, of course, I totally get why that grandmother is like sold out for that, whatever it takes. That's what God would say. And, a text that I'm doing some memorization in right now, and we'll get to in the fourth week of the series on Commitment Weekend, is a text in 1 Corinthians 9, where Paul talks about this transition he's had going from like the most religious leader you can imagine to a passionate follower of Jesus. And he says, look, I was a slave. Now I'm free. Like I'm no longer under the law. It's amazing. And here's what I've done. I'm taking my freedom and I'm using it to become a servant to everyone. I'm going to become a servant to the weak. I'm going to become a servant to the strong. I'm going to become a servant to the religious. I'm going to become a servant to the irreligious. He says, I become all things to all people so that by any means necessary, I might save some. He says, I do it all for the sake of the gospel, that I might share with them in its blessing. Paul says, whatever it is, he's saying, that lady's grandchildren, I want them to know Jesus, and I'll do whatever it takes to do it.
Right. That's good.
Wow. That urgency is really like, it's not only it's compelling, but it is the biggest why we can have.
Right.
And it's so easy for us, just as we go through our day-to-day lives, the biggest why for us could be stability, or could be control, or could be, how can I try to make my life the most comfortable?
Totally.
And so it feels like those things are so at odds
Yes.
Right.
with each other.
Well, and
man.
I feel this like as deep as it possibly can be in my life. Buried my brother, who to my knowledge was not a follower of Jesus. Watched my dad become a follower of Jesus in the very last years of his life after going through just an unthinkably challenging life himself. Got to celebrate and honor my mom, very different faith legacy. I think for me, I instantly clicked to eternity, which I think is appropriate. But I think the other part of it to that question of like, hey, people thinking about their comfort, for a lot of people, the like one day, someday hell thing, they're like that. I almost like live in cognitive dissonance of that. Like I can't even emotionally process that. Like it would be crushing. And I get it. But I would say part of the urgency for me too, Jesus said in John 10:10, the thief comes only to kill, steal, and destroy, but I've come that you might have life and have it to the abundance. It's not just about it's not just about the hell that people are going to, it's about the hell that they're walking through.
Right.
And so I think some of it is the way of Jesus is a better way of life.
Yeah.
It's not easier,
Yeah.
but it's a better way of life. And so the people that think that comfort is going to mean purpose, the people that think accomplishments and accolades can quiet the voice inside of them that says you were made for more than this, it can't. And so the reason that we do this is not just for eternity, although that's a big deal.
Sure.
It's that the eternity starts right now, and it's in our heart today. Right. Yeah.
So Rachelle, as you're hearing this, and as you are at the Mountain View campus, and you're there, what excites you about what could be? Maybe specifically for Mountain View.
Good questions. I've a lot. Yeah, I would love to see, like, we've got a great kids and students program happening at Mountain View. Those kids who attend MSM, the 11:30 service, they are crammed into a room probably as big as the studio.
Yeah.
And I don't want them to be like, I can't go there anymore because there's no room for me and this is too uncomfortable. And
100%.
Middle school kids stink. They smell bad. And I don't want the leaders to say, they smell so bad in this room. And I don't want them to say that about each other. Yeah. I want a bigger space for them. I want a bigger space for them to like play games, hang out, and have small group, without being on top of each other. I want to see, as you mentioned, like having a special needs kid, I want to see that ministry grow and develop and have physical spaces. Our kids ministry directors are doing their very best with what they have, which is what we are called to do. But I would love to like develop a sensory room. Like that is a game changer for families to be like, hey, you can bring your kids to church because you can go sit in the service and your kid is going to have a safe environment for them. I want to, like, there is a really cool kitchen at the Mountain View campus. I would love to see that, like, a real full-blown kitchen invested in and, like, be cooking meals for the people in the neighborhood who need it. Like, the dreams are endless.
Of course. And that's what's fun about this is we get to dream and we get to say, hey, like, how can we help our local neighborhoods, the people that are right around us?
Yeah.
Like, how can our campuses best serve them? And what does that look like? And what does lowering that barrier to entry of the person that's walking 2 minutes from their house onto our campus, like, how can we make that happen?
Yeah.
And it's exciting because it's unique at each campus too.
Sure is. Yeah. Yep.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
Cool. Well, Phil, anything else? Any other questions you've got recently that you want to double click on? Anything that you're like, I probably should have added that if I had more time?
I mean, this week I would say really does kind of dovetail into next week of like, we talked a little bit about, generosity and what does it look like to be a generous person. I think next week we're going to talk about kind of like what are the stakes of me doing this or not doing this. Mm-hmm. But I just want to reiterate something that I talked about around what does this giving pathway at Menlo look like? Because if you don't give, this campaign really does demonstrate kind of an opportunity for you to test God on this, for you to be a pilot giver and just try it out. And I'd encourage you, even if you've never given before, to Rachelle's point earlier, these initiatives represent such unique opportunities to try to incorporate healthy habits. And you think about all the different parts of your life that you want to be able to do, and how do you do it? You don't go from like, I don't ever work out to like tomorrow I run a marathon. You can destroy yourself, right?
What?
And so like the first step of that might just be, hey, I'm going to give something. I'm going to talk to God. I'm going to trust God with the number that he puts on my heart. For a lot of people, I think that's where they are at Menlo right now. Like when we do, there's a big crisis somewhere in the world and we say, hey, would you help us with this? Or, hey, we're nearing the end of our fiscal year. Would you help us bridge the gap? Those kind of one-time like little moments they'll give. And the next step for a lot of people at Menlo, I think, is to become priority givers, to give God their first and best, not their leftovers, not what's hanging around, not giving out of just comfort and ease, but saying, God, before something else, you're going to get my first and best. God honors us and honors the faith that we have when we give him our first and best. And then for some of you, it's giving that growing percentage. You've never even done the math of what you give against what you make. 10% in the Hebrew scriptures was sort of a baseline, right? We treat it like a ceiling, but it was never designed to be that. It's certainly not that in the New Testament, but a baseline to say, God, all right, that's the number I'm going to assume I'm starting with. And then finally, there's some people that's what you've been doing for a long time, and the Lord's really blessed you financially. And 10% is a rounding error. You would never feel it in your life. You don't even realize you give it.
Right.
And God's asking you to give above and beyond. Maybe it's above and beyond from the cash flow that you receive. We have some people that are literally talking about and praying about selling homes and giving significant proceeds. And I'm like, oh my goodness, and I'm saying, talk to the Lord like that. I don't want to be the person that's twisting anybody's arm for that. But I would say wherever you are in that giving pathway, just ask the Lord, maybe this is the season to take the next step. So I also did this thing while we were talking, which probably was funny if you were watching on YouTube because I was a little distracted. But I took, so before we started, Rachelle was talking about a rap song, a Christian rap song, which I couldn't find, a Christian rap song about money. But what I did do is I took the weekend's message, I put it into ChatGPT. I said, I want you to make a rap song out of this. And then I went to a music generator and I said, take these lyrics and create a Christian style rap song out of these lyrics. So I kind of wanted to finish by just playing this rap song.
Absolutely.
Please
Is that
do.
okay? All right. So here we go, everybody.
I'm so relieved you didn't say you recorded me singing it.
Oh, yeah, I did. It's right here. So I have not actually listened to all of this. So we'll see. We can still
It's
edit.
the first time together.
It's already good.
It's already good.
Hope, favor, yeah, we know it's true. God don't need your money, but he's after you. Giving
Right?
is the way we show where we stand, with open hearts and open hands.
I love it.
Menlo Church, it's time to rise. Bay Area campuses, open your eyes.
Oh,
Hope for
is a
everyone.
bop.
It's not just a theme, it's a move of God, big enough for dreams.
Oh my God.
Aiming high, 3% to reach, with heaven's hope. That's what we preach. Last week we talked, you took it to heart. This week we give God our treasure, do our part. See, giving ain't about what God's trying to take. It's showing he's got your heart for heaven's sake.
Wow.
One lost coin, one lost soul. He lights up the dark to make us whole.
Let's go.
Let's go.
Let's go.
Hey,
Oh
I'm
my
coming for you.
goodness. I have so many thoughts.
That's right.
But that is amazing.
So we can make that track available. There you go. I just like, I bet I could do something like this. So there we go.
Amazing.
Incredible.
Way
Yep.
better than the song I was thinking of.
Yeah, there you go.
Thanks, Phil. That was
course.
awesome.
Thank you for
Rachelle,
doing that.
Thank you.
Yeah.
If you need any prayer encouragement this week, text our team, 650-600-0402. Head over to menlo.church/hope for more information. Have a great week, everybody. And shout out to Rob, who is helping out record this podcast. Thanks,
Way to
buddy.
go.
Have a great week. See everybody soon.